If I asked a large group of people who Stokely Carmichael is, many people would not know, no matter if they were black or white. This was the same for me until I learned about him in a college course that censors black identities and histories titled Afro-American History. Black people are consistently left out of history, despite the many contributions and other socio-economic advancements they have made. Stokely Carmichael is a name not too many people know or even heard of. He's not taught about in school and gets erased from history as time goes on. The erasure of black people like Stokely Carmichael happens to erase the stories of black success and possibility to create more palatable versions that continue to put white people in more favorable positions and to reaffirm the false notion that the only position African Americans have held in this country is under the power of whites. Stokely Carmichael, also known as Kwame Ture, was born on June 29, 1941, in Port of Spain, Trinidad. His family moved to New York when he was 11, where he was accepted into the mostly white Burnside School of Science in 1956. There, he met experienced black radicals and communist activists.
Nonsense, which we were never a part of and could never hope to be a part of. I think that's what the problem that America is now facing with her youth, both black and white, that we're all beginning to question, why is it that she's the richest country in the world? Is it that she exploits other countries? Is it that she steals, murders, and plunders? Or is it that she's so smart that she can develop her resources to yield the amount of productivity that it does? And I think that most of the youth are beginning to see that the United States has been exploiting other countries and that we have been enjoying that good life at the expense of other countries. And that, when you match that with the American dream, which talks about honesty and equality and a fair share for everybody, and to recognize that you talk that nonsense at the expense of somebody in Vietnam or South Africa or Latin America, Asia, Japan, just makes you sick to the stomach. You want to puke.
When we look at all the acts of racist exploitation which this nation has committed, whether in the name of manifest destiny or anti-communism, we charge America with genocide.
1960, as a senior in high school, Carmichael learned about the sit-in movement for desegregation in the South and joined activists from the Congress of Racial Equality, also known as CORE, protesting in New York against Woolworth stores, a chain that maintained segregated lunch counters in the South. This was also known as the Greensboro Sit-In, which was a civil rights protest that started in 1960 when young African American students staged a sit-in at a segregated Woolworth's lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina, and refused to leave after being denied service. The sit-in movement soon spread to college towns throughout the South. Though many of the protesters were arrested for trespassing, disorderly conduct, or disturbing the peace, their actions made an immediate and lasting impact, forcing Woolworths and other establishments to change their segregationist policies. He would then go on to attend Howard University and join the newly formed Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, also known as SNCC, in 1960. He participated in SNCC sit-ins and freedom rides throughout the Deep South, and when SNCC turned its attention to voter registration, Carmichael led the campaign that established the Lowndes County Freedom Organization. In 1961, Carmichael was one of the several freedom riders who traveled through the South, challenging segregation laws and interstate transportation. For his participation, he was arrested and jailed for about 50 days in Jackson, Mississippi. Martin Luther King Southern Christian Leadership Conference, also known as SCLC, awarded Carmichael a scholarship designed to support arrested students, and he continued his studies at Howard. Carmichael continued his involvement with the civil rights movement in SNCC after his graduation with honors from Howard University in 1964. That summer, he joined SNCC in Lowndes County, Alabama, for an African American voter registration drive and helped to organize the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, also known as LCFO. LCFO was started in 1965, where Lowndes County in Alabama was 80% black, but not a single black citizen was registered to vote.
Carmichael and other SNCC members began a voter drive in Lowndes County, Alabama, known as Bloody Lowndes for its violence against blacks. Although 80% of the population was black, there were no black elected officials. Economically dependent on white plantation owners, many were afraid to join civil rights efforts, and none had been allowed to register to vote until early 1965.
Now, in this country, it says majority rules. We are 80% of the majority in this. We are 80% in this county, and we have the right to rule this county. We have the right to rule this county, and we're going to rule it. I don't care how poor we are and how black we are, we're going to govern this county.
Stokely, Carmichael, and Colton Cox and others who got together and told us, according to the Alabama law, if we didn't like what the Democratic Party was doing in our county or the Republican Party, we could form our own political organization and it could become a political party.
George Wallace was then the head of the Alabama Democratic Party. The Democratic Party was racist. Its symbol at that time had a white rooster, and it had the words of white supremacy. That was the official emblem of the Democratic Party of Alabama. So here it would be easy for us to tell our people, hey, look, this party is not for us. We need our own party.
The new political party was named the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, but it became better known by the symbol it chose, a Black Panther.
And then when we chose that symbol as a Black Panther, then many of the people in our county started saying we were violent during that time. You know, now you got a violent group in Lowndes County who was turning out, who was going to start killing white folks. But it wasn't that. It was a political, just a symbol to our organization that we was here to stay and we were going to do whatever needed to be done to survive.
Everybody was excited because they said, well, they have the rooster, which represents the Democratic Party, the elephant, which represents the Republican Party. Why can't we have a black cat to represent us? Everybody knows how a cat look, and we were excited because we knew that if a person couldn't read and write, they sure knew the difference between a cat, an elephant, and a rooster.
During this period, Carmichael and other associates with SNCC supported the nonviolence approach to desegregation espoused by Martin Luther King Jr. But Carmichael was becoming increasingly frustrated, having witnessed beatings and murders of several civil rights activists such as Andrew Goodman, James Chaney, Mickey Schwerner, and the assassination of Malcolm X. In 1966, he became the chairman of SNCC, and during a march in Mississippi, he rallied demonstrators in founding the Black Power movement, which espoused self-defense tactics, self-determination, political and economic power, and racial pride. The slogan and Carmichael's subsequent efforts to both define it and put it into practice turned him into a media celebrity and a lightning rod for white criticism and government repression. Black Power fragmented the liberal civil rights coalition of the 1950s and the early 1960s, but inspired subsequent groups such as the Black Panther Party, which, despite ideological disagreements, named Carmichael as its honorary prime minister in 1968. This controversial split from King's ideology of nonviolence and racial integration was seen by moderate blacks as detrimental to the civil rights cause and was viewed with apprehension by many whites. Before leaving SNCC in 1968, Carmichael traveled abroad, speaking out against political and economic repression and denouncing U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War.
The problem has been, as black people, we've always been concerned about white America, never about us. And what we've always thought is that white America equal the same interest as us. That is not true. We must now be concerned with us. Let me give you some examples. We always want to prove what good Americans we are. The very first man to die for the War of Independence in this country was a black man named Crispus Attucks. Crispus Attucks. he was a fool. Because here he was dying for white folk freedom, and millions of his brothers were enslaved in the very country. Oh, but we wanted to prove what great Americans we were. We begged the white folk to let us fight in the War of Independence, and they said no. So we organized ourselves in bands of armies, training ourselves with our bare foot to prove to the white folk what great Americans we were. Please let us fight, white folk. And finally they came and inspected our troops and said, good niggers, you can fight. And they had us fighting the Indians. Like fools, we should have teamed up with the Indians and take care of you-know-who.
Upon his return, Carmichael's passport was confiscated and held for 10 months. During this period, Carmichael was targeted by a section of J. Edgar Hoover's COINTELPRO that focused on black activists. The program promoted slander and violence against targets Hoover considered enemies of the U.S. government. It attempted to discredit them and worse. Carmichael accepted the position of the honorary prime minister in the Black Panther Party, but also remained on the SNCC staff. He tried to forge a merger between the two organizations. A March 4th, 1968 memo from Hoover states his fear of the rise of a black nationalist messiah, and that Carmichael alone had the necessary charisma to be a real threat in this way. In July 1968, Hoover stepped up his efforts to divide the Black Power movement. Declassified documents show he launched a plan to undermine the SNCC-Panther merger, as well as to badjacket Carmichael as a CIA agent. Both efforts were largely successful. Carmichael was expelled from SNCC that year, and the Panthers began to denounce him, putting him at a grave personal risk. He left the United States in 1969 and moved with his first wife, a South African singer, Miriam Makeba, to Guinea, West Africa. He also changed his name to Kwame Ture in honor of two early proponents of Pan-Africanism, Ghanaian Kwame Nkrumah and Ghanaian Sekou Touré. Carmichael helped to establish the All-African People's Revolutionary Party, an international political party dedicated to Pan-Africanism and the plight of Africans worldwide. Carmichael spent the last decades of his life abroad, renouncing U.S. racism and imperialism. Carmichael settled permanently in Conakry, Guinea, where he died of prostate cancer in 1998.